Montana Territory, 1889. Vanja Komarbixit. He was in the tall grass between the fence line and the bend of Willow Creek, face down, one arm flung toward a hat that had rolled a few feet into the reeds. His horse, a rangy chestnut gelding, stood off to the side with the reins trailing, watching her with the patient stillness of an animal that had been waiting there a long while. Vanja Komade down. He was breathing. She checked that first, the way her father had taught her. Start with what you can confirm. There was a gash above his right temple, dried and cracked open again where he'd fallen. His left arm sat wrong against his body, wrenched, she guessed, not broken. His skin ran cold in some places and too warm in others, the particular chill of a man who had spent a whole night on wet ground after a storm. She loosened his cinch to ease his breathing, and when she lifted the saddle skirt to check for blood underneath, she saw it. A mark burned into the leather along the fender, deep and old. A hawk stamped above two crossed rails. Vein Shikamide, Iduamanino Wido, Shuan Wenubens, Vi Binu Martinpur, Soir. Then she looked back at the man in the grass, at the fever climbing under his skin, and did the arithmetic. He was hurt. She was the only one here, and the nearest town was the better part of an hour off. Whatever the brand meant, it didn't change what was lying in front of her. She got her mare alongside him, and spent the better part of 20 minutes hauling a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds up into the saddle, then led both horses toward the line shack at the edge of the property, the nearest shelter with a cot, a stove, and a rain barrel. She did not ask herself if this was wise. She had already decided. The rest was just getting it done. Getting him settled took the better part of an hour more. She cut away the sleeve binding his left arm, packed the shoulder with a folded towel soaked in creek water, and built the stove fire up higher than she normally would have, because his shivering hadn't stopped even once he was under a blanket. She sat with him through the first night in the chair by the cot, listening to his breathing change, telling herself she would ride for the doctor at first light if the fever hadn't broken by then. It hadn't. She rode anyway, left a note pinned to the shack door in case he woke alone, and came back 3 hours later with willow bark tea and a jar of her mother's old fever salve, the one she rarely opened because it reminded her too much of who had taught her to make it. The fever broke on the second night. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair beside the cot without meaning to, and she woke near 3 in the morning to find him watching her with the unfocused attention of a man unsure whether he was awake yet. "You're at the line shack on the Whitfield place," she said before he could ask. "Your horse is in the lean-to. You took a fever and your arms wrenched." "How long?" he asked. "Second night." He closed his eyes, opened them again. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're not clear of the fever." He was clear by morning, though weak enough that standing left him gray in the face. On the third day, propped against the wall with a cup of broth he could barely hold steady, he told her his name. "Nathaniel Boone," he said, "horse breaker, mostly. I was cutting across toward Millbrook when my gelding spooked at something in the brush and threw me." He said it plainly, without the watchfulness of a man expecting a reaction. He didn't know. She understood that now. He didn't know what that name meant on this side of the valley. She didn't tell him. That wasn't hers to hand over. The Boone name was her father's wound, and her father was 3 weeks into a cattle drive to Helena and wouldn't be back until the middle of November. Whatever this was, it could wait for him. It was only October. "Nathaniel Boone," she said instead. "Clara Whitfield." "I owe you considerably," he said. "You owe me the use of a cot. That's the accounting." Something in his face moved, not quite a smile. "Is that how you keep things? Simple accounting? It makes them easier to carry." He held her gaze a moment, then let his eyes drop shut again, worn out from the effort of sitting up. She took the empty cup from his hands before it tipped and did not examine too closely what she felt about a man wearing that brand who had just handed her own words back to her. That night she sat outside on the shack steps longer than she needed to, looking east toward the dark line of the Boone property, though from here you couldn't see anything of it but the shape of the hills. She thought about riding into Millbrook the next morning and asking someone, anyone, whether the name Boone still carried the weight it had carried when she was small enough not to understand it. She decided against it. Whatever answer she got wouldn't change what was lying in the cot behind her, wrenched shoulder and cracked open cut and all. It would only change how she looked at him while she tended it, and she found she didn't want that yet. He didn't touch the fence for another week. His arm wouldn't allow it, and the one time he tried to lift a rail, she told him plainly to sit back down, which he did, which she noted. By the second week he was resetting a single post one-handed while she held it steady, moving slow, testing what the arm would bear. It was another week before he could manage a post-hole digger properly, and by then it had become something they simply did together most mornings, not a debt being paid so much as a habit neither of them had named yet. "You found the tool shed," she said the first morning he went looking for it. "Door was open. I knocked first. There's no one to knock for. Habit," he said, and moved to the next post. She brought coffee out one morning, and they stood at the fence line looking at the October light on the cottonwoods already going gold along the creek. "How long have you been running this place with your father gone?" he asked. "Since my mother died. I was 9. He didn't offer a condolence, which she was grateful for. 21 years of them hadn't changed the fact. "My sister's buried near a creek too," he said after a while. Not as an invitation, just a fact, laid down the same way she'd laid hers down. "How old were you?" 13. She was 9. They stood with that a moment, the wind moving through the grass. Then he handed back the empty cup. "Third post needs resetting," he said. "I'll have it by noon." She went back inside and thought, not for the first time, about a man who could say a thing like that and go straight back to work. He left a tin of salve on the gatepost the following week with a note for the cut supply. NB she'd used the last of hers on him and hadn't mentioned it. He'd noticed anyway. He started bringing his own coffee after that, in a battered tin pot he balanced on the corner of the stove. And some mornings they didn't talk much at all, just worked the fence line in the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Once he caught her watching the way he favored his left arm even weeks after the wrenching had healed, and instead of asking if she was worried, he simply switched the digger to his right hand without comment, which she understood as its own kind of answer. After that, the encounters happened the way small valley encounters do, frequent enough not to quite be accidental, ordinary enough to need no acknowledgement. At Millbrook's general store, where he was buying wire and she was buying flour, and he carried her sack to the wagon without being asked and without making anything of it. At the Sunday social in the church hall, where he stood near the back with his hat in his hands and didn't dance with anyone, though she caught him watching the room the way a man watches something he's only recently allowed himself to want. At the farrier's, where their horses waited together and they stood in the same strip of shade for the better part of an hour. It was there, waiting on the farrier, that he told her the rest of it. "I was sent to my uncle's outfit near Bozeman after Ruth died," he said. "I was 13. Grew up there, learned horses from him, built my whole trade out that way. Only came back to my father's place this past spring, when his health started going. I've been trying to piece together what happened to my sister ever since. Found an old letter of his that mentioned a spring shared between 2 fence lines, and I followed it. That's how I ended up on your North Road. You've been back 6 months, she said, about that." It explained things she hadn't known needed explaining. Why a man wearing that brand didn't seem to know what it cost on this side of the valley. Why he still moved through the land like someone relearning a place he'd loved and had to leave. At the harvest market, he bought 2 jars of her apple butter and said the second was for his father, who had a preference for apple. She watched him walk off with it and noticed, before he'd gone 20 feet, that the lid on the first jar was already loose and the level already down by a third. She didn't say anything. She filed it the way she filed most things about him. She'd started thinking, without quite deciding to, about the pantry shelf where she kept her preserves, about whether there was a way to sell them past the county line, whether the old orchard on the west edge of the property could be brought back if someone put real work into it. She hadn't told anyone that. She wasn't sure yet why she was thinking about it more lately than she used to. One evening she caught herself pulling out her mother's old ledger, the one with the pressed apple blossoms still tucked between 2 pages near the back, and running her finger down the columns of a harvest that hadn't happened in 21 years. She didn't write anything in it. She just sat with it a while, the way you sit with an old idea to see if it's still sturdy enough to build on. She noted, too, that she still hadn't told him about her father. That could wait for November. He asked her one Sunday if she'd ever ridden Eagle Ridge. She had, many times, but said no because she wanted to hear him describe it. He described it correctly, the way the valley opened past the 3rd stand of cottonwoods, the spring that ran clean even this late in the year. He knew it the way you know a place you've paid attention to. My father's land runs the east edge of that valley, he said. We've grazed that pasture since before I was born. She noted it, filed it. They rode up on a Saturday, the sky enormous, the cottonwoods making the dry rushing sound they make when the wind moves through. He let her set the pace on the parts she knew better. She let him lead where the creek crossed soft ground he remembered from childhood. If the land were mine outright, she said at the top, I'd bring the west orchard back. My mother planted half of it before she died. Nobody's touched it since. What's stopping you? Time, and a father who thinks it's more trouble than the apples are worth. He looked at her like he was filing that away too. Where would you sell them? Past the county line, maybe. If I ever got that far. You'd get that far, he said, and it didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like an observation. They tied the horses at the tree line and walked the last stretch on foot, the grass gone silver gold with frost that hadn't burned off yet in the shade. She showed him the flat rock her mother used to sit on to watch the light change over the valley, and he sat there without being told it mattered, which told her he understood it did. At the top of the ridge, they could see both properties laid out below, the Whitfield barn, the north fence now standing straight, and past it, the east edge where the Boone land began. He was looking at that line the way a man looks at something he hasn't finished understanding. Does it ever bother you? She asked, not knowing the whole of it. Your sister, I mean. Every day I don't ask him is a day I'm choosing not to know, he said. I've been telling myself I'm giving him time. Some mornings I think I'm just giving myself more time before I have to carry whatever it is. She didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that would have helped, and she'd learned enough about him by now to know he wasn't asking for one. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't move away. This is the last easy day, she thought. I should remember it exactly. Walter Whitfield came back 9 days ahead of schedule. The drive to Helena finished early, and he was crossing the yard with a saddlebag over his shoulder when he heard them coming down the south track. He stopped. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the man beside her. He looked at the horse, at the mark burned into the fender, plain from 20 feet, a hawk above 2 crossed rails. His face went somewhere past anger, somewhere older. Get away from my daughter. Papa, I know who he is. Get inside, Clara. She didn't get inside. She got down and stood between them. Tell me, she said to her father. Walter looked at the brand a long moment before he spoke. Your mother, the fire. Amos Boone's horse was outside our barn that night. His saddle on the fence post, that same mark. I went to him the next morning. He didn't deny being there. He said nothing at all. His voice was level in the way of something held a long time. He let me believe what I believed for 21 years. And Clara looked at Nathaniel, still on the horse. Something had shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated. Nathaniel, she said, tell me what you know. He got down and stood with his hat in his hands. I was 13 when the fire happened, he said. My sister Ruth was 9. I was sent to my uncle's place 2 weeks after, and I only came back to my father's this past spring, when his health started failing. I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened that night, because he's never once explained it to me. He looked at Walter directly. I didn't know until just now that you believed he started it. I didn't know what he's been carrying. His voice didn't shake. It went level instead, which is what a voice does when steady isn't quite possible. I don't know everything my father did that night. I know he was there. I know he's never spoken of it. I know my sister went with him and didn't come home. He held Walter's gaze. I'm going to ride home and ask him again, and I'm going to keep asking until I have all of it. He looked at Clara, standing between the two men, between the last easy day and whatever this was now. I'm sorry, he said, for what my family cost yours. He put his hat on, mounted, and rode east. Clara watched him go, then turned to her father, who stood in the yard with 21 years of grief on his face and the beginnings of a doubt he hadn't let himself feel before. You knew, Walter said. Not quite an accusation, closer to disbelief. I knew the brand the first morning. I didn't know what it meant until you told me just now. Not really. I knew it was yours to tell, not mine to guess at. You let that man on this land. I let a hurt man on this land, same as I'd have done for anyone bleeding in my north pasture. I didn't know then what I know now, and I'm not sure it would have changed what I did. She held her father's eyes, which took more steadiness than she let show. It doesn't change what I did today either. Walter didn't answer that. He picked up his saddlebag and went inside, and she heard the door of her mother's old sewing room close. the one he still went into some nights when the grief got too heavy to carry through the rest of the house. Nathaniel found his father in the barn, working a length of harness leather. Amos set it aside the moment his son appeared in the doorway. "I met Walter Whitfield's daughter today," Nathaniel said. "I met her because I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened the night Ruth died, and today Walter looked at my saddle and told me what you never did." Amos looked at his hands for a long time before he spoke. "I was riding to the Whitfield place that night," he said, "to settle the dispute over the spring. I'd wanted to propose we share the water for 2 years, and hadn't, because my pride was in the way. I never reached the house. The storm caught me at the property line. Lightning struck the old cottonwood near their barn. Sparks caught the dry grass at the foundation." He stopped, then started again. "I ran in to free the horses before the fire spread. I didn't know Ruth had followed me on her pony until I heard her inside, calling for it. The animal had bolted into a stall and wouldn't come. She went in after it before I could stop her. He'd gone back in for her. He'd gotten her as far as the door. Grace saw her go in," Amos said. "Grace Whitfield. She was there that night. She and your mother had been close as sisters since before either of you were born. Grace had come to help with the horses, same as I had. She saw Ruth run in and she went straight after her. No hesitation at all. Nathaniel sat very still. I went back for both of them. It was smoke and horses and noise, and in the scramble, I knocked a lantern off the post. The fire caught faster after that, caught the loft. I got the two of them near the door. A support beam came down between us. It threw me clear toward the entrance. I couldn't get back to them. Ruth hadn't made it. Grace hadn't made it. When Walter came to me the next morning and said I'd started it, I let him believe it," Amos said, "because I had been there when I had no business being there, because I'd knocked over the lantern, because his wife died going in after my daughter, and I came out, and they didn't." He looked at his hands. "I believed I deserved every bit of what he thought of me. I still believe it some days." He was quiet a long moment, working a slow crease into the harness leather with his thumbnail out of old habit, the same way he always had when a thing needed saying and hadn't found its way out yet. "I sent you to your uncle's inside 2 weeks. Told myself it was so you wouldn't have to grow up under what folks were saying about this family. Truth is, I couldn't stand to look at you and see her in your face. That's mine to answer for too. I let you grow up not knowing your own sister's death, and I let you grow up not knowing why your own father couldn't hardly stand in a room with you. That's a harder thing to forgive than the fire, I expect, and I wouldn't blame you for taking your time with it." Nathaniel thought about 6 months of questions, about a woman standing between 2 men that afternoon, about a spring 2 families had fought over for no reason worth the cost. "The families were close," he said, before. 15 years, Amos said. He reached into his coat and drew out a small locket on a chain, blackened along one edge, the hinge warped by heat. "Open it." Inside, Grace Whitfield on the porch steps, Ruth tucked laughing under her arm, Grace looking down at her the way you look at a child who belongs to you, even when she doesn't. Nathaniel came back to the Whitfield place on Thursday, not knowing if either of them would see him. He came anyway, because not coming wasn't something he could manage. Clara opened the door. "I came to talk to your father," he said. He had the locket in his hand. Walter sat at the kitchen table because Clara asked him to, not because he wanted to. Nathaniel told it plainly, in order. The storm, the cottonwood, the horses, Ruth following without Amos knowing, Grace going in after her, the lantern, the beam. "He didn't start the fire," Nathaniel said. "He was there without telling you why, and the lantern went over in the scramble to save both of them. He's carried that for 21 years, believing he deserved everything you gave him for it." He slid the locket across the table. "Open it." Walter opened it. His thumb stopped on the scorched edge. For a long while, he seemed to forget Nathaniel was in the room at all. Grace and Ruth under her arm, his own porch steps in the background. He knew exactly which summer, exactly which week. "She wouldn't have wanted this," he said finally. Not to Nathaniel, to the photograph. "I know," Nathaniel said. "Does your father know you're here? He wants to come himself. I told him to let me come first." Walter looked at the locket a long while. "Not today," he said. "Tell him not today." Nathaniel nodded and stood. Clara walked him to the door, and when he passed her, she put her hand briefly on his arm. Not romance, just 2 people who'd stood in the same wreckage, acknowledging it. He understood. He rode east. Miles came on a Monday, on foot, the hour's walk from the east line. He came without witnesses, without a written account, without an excuse prepared. He waited at the gate until Walter came out. Amanus, and menu. But I knocked over the lantern, and I let you believe I started it, because I was there, and Ruth followed me, and your wife went in after her, and I was the only one who came out. He didn't look away. My silence fed your hate for 21 years. I can't give back what you lost, or what I chose not to tell you. I'm telling you now. I'm asking your pardon, not for the fire, for the silence. Walter studied him a long time. He didn't say I forgive you. My wife's name was Grace, he said. I know, Amos said. Your daughter has her eyes. He's just 9 years old, Walter said of Ruth. She was kind, she was. Grace would have gone in for her even if she wasn't ours to protect. That was who she was. I know, Amos said. That's why I kept the photograph. Walter opened the gate. Not an invitation, just an opening, the way you let air into a room that's been shut too long. You'll want to come in out of the wind, Walter said, which was as close to hospitality as he had in him that day, and about as much as either of them could manage on a Monday morning, still raw with 21 years of unspoken grief between them. Amos stepped through. Neither man spoke again for a while, but neither man left either, and Clara, watching from the porch, understood that this was what beginnings actually looked like. Not a handshake, not a speech, just two old men sitting on the same side of a fence they'd spent 21 years standing apart on either side of. That was the beginning. Standing there was the beginning. The two men didn't speak much in the weeks that followed. There were dinners that ended in silence, visits that lasted only long enough to check on a fence line or trade news of the weather. But Walter started leaving his gate unlatched on the days Amos was expected, and Amos started walking the hour from the east line instead of waiting to be asked, and between those two small, unspoken habits, something began to loosen that had been locked tight for 21 years. They opened the spring together in December, Amos and Walter, with Nathaniel and Clara watching from the rise. The water ran clean the way it always had, patient through the whole dispute above it. They planted 2 trees beside it, one for Grace, one for Ruth, Clara's idea. Both fathers said yes without arguing about it, which told her something. It wasn't reconciliation as a single event. There were still weeks when Walter couldn't look at Amos without the old grief surfacing. Weeks when Amos couldn't come to the fence line at all. But the trees grew. One February morning, Walter came out to find Nathaniel saddling Clara's mare at the gate, and beside it, Nathaniel's gelding making a nuisance of itself, tugging his own glove out of his coat pocket by the fingers for the 3rd time that week, a habit Nathaniel had given up correcting. Walter looked at the brand on Nathaniel's saddle a long moment, not with forgiveness exactly, with the beginning of trying. She likes Eagle Ridge in the morning, Walter said. I know. Don't keep her past noon. The weather comes in fast off the East Range this time of year. He went back inside. Clara came out with her coat and read something in Nathaniel's face. What did he say? That the weather comes in fast. Was that a blessing? Closest one we're going to get before the wedding, Nathaniel said, and got the gelding's glove back for the 3rd time. It was March before he said it, up on Eagle Ridge where they'd first taken each other's hand. I've been turning something over, Nathaniel said, and I want to say it plainly, the way you taught me. I won't ask you to marry me just to finish mending what our fathers broke. That's not reason enough for either of us. Then don't, Clara said. He went still. Ask me because Sundays have become the best day of my week, she said. Ask me because I've stopped riding this ridge alone and don't want to start again. Ask me because that's the truth of it. And nothing about our fathers changes what's true. She was quiet a moment, looking out over the valley where the 2 properties met at the spring. I used to think love was supposed to fix something, she said. Make up for what was lost. I don't think that anymore. I think it just has to be true, and everything else either follows or it doesn't. And if I'd never worn that brand, he said, if none of this had ever happened between our fathers, would you still have said yes? I'd have said yes faster, she said, and it would have been exactly this easy and exactly this true. The rest was never the reason. It was just the road we had to walk to get here. He asked her because of that. She said yes because of that. They told her father first, then rode east to tell his. Neither man said much. Walter looked at the 2 of them a long moment and said only, well, the trees are already planted. Amos said nothing at all and put his hand briefly on his son's shoulder, which was more than either of them expected from him. They married in the spring, in the strip of land between the two properties. Not Whitfield land, not Boone land, where the spring ran and the two young trees were coming into their second season. Walter walked Clara to where Nathaniel stood and put her hand in his, looking at his son-in-law a moment, at a man who'd come back to a valley carrying a name he hadn't known the weight of and hadn't walked away from it once he learned it. He nodded. That was all it took. Amos stood on the other side and watched his son marry Walter Whitfield's daughter, the locket with the photograph now on a chain around Clara's neck. He wore his good coat, the one Nathaniel hadn't seen since before his mother's passing, and when the vows were said he didn't wipe his eyes so much as let them water and didn't seem ashamed of it, which was its own kind of new for him. Half of Millbrook came, curious more than anything to see the Whitfield girl marry a Boone, and by the time the fiddler struck up something quick near sundown, most of them had stopped whispering about it and started dancing instead, which Clara took as its own kind of blessing, quieter than her father's but no less real. Standing by the spring after, Clara thought about a Wednesday in October and a man face down in tall grass, about a decision made on simple arithmetic. He was hurt. She was there. She thought about a tin of salve on a gatepost, an open jar of apple butter, a ridge in November with the cottonwoods making that sound. She thought about her mother, who would have gone in for a child she loved even knowing the cost, and about a girl of 9 who followed her father into a fire because she was kind and brave enough to. She would have liked you, Clara said. Which one? Both. He took her hand. The spring ran on beside them, and the two trees kept growing, and it was, in every way that mattered, worth all of it. Clara Whitfield found a wounded cowboy by her fence on a Wednesday in October, and helped him because the arithmetic was simple. He was hurt. She was there. What followed was not simple at all. Amos Boone knocked over a lantern in a burning barn and spent 21 years carrying blame for a fire he hadn't started because silence felt safer than the truth of where he'd been that night. Walter Whitfield lost his wife and pointed 21 years of grief at a name because grief needs somewhere to go. Neither man was cruel. Both were in pain, and pain left alone too long calcifies into something harder to undo than the original wound. Nathaniel and Clara didn't fix 21 years between them. They opened a gate and let the air in, and planted 2 trees, and let a spring keep running the way it always had, patient, indifferent to old wars, waiting for someone to notice it was still there. A brand burned into old leather had once told Clara everything she thought she needed to know about a stranger in the grass. It took a whole winter, and 2 men finally willing to speak, to teach her that a mark like that only ever tells you where someone comes from, never who they've chosen to become. Sometimes that's all it takes.